See, we're already collaborating. Yeah. Okay. Sharing again. Okay, starting again. So Culture Push is an organization where you can find ideas that have no other home. You can bring ideas there, here. And we're also specifically interested in how artistic practice exists in a cultural moment and a social moment. And so if you know anything about Culture Push, you probably have seen our like the nature of the projects that we support. And it's a very expansive practice. And one of the original principles was the idea that for the 3 artists that started it, including we were all involved in several different fields. So I have a background in science and dance and now other things. And the other artists also had this kind of multiple identity, and it seemed like knowledge should come together and inform rather than be siloed. So we wanted to support adventurous and experimental ideas, not necessarily just forms. And it's kind of one of those things where you don't see what you want, and so you make it yourself. And that's what Culture Push was for us. So it's an experiment in organization. And in that sense, it's not necessarily a typical arts nonprofit, because we try to be fluid and agile and responsive to the needs of the people we're working with. So we tested out a few different programs when we started, and the Fellowship for Utopian Practice was kind of the answer to a question of like, well, what are we trying to do here? And we realized that we really wanted to support people who are at the beginning of a process of working on complex projects. So the Fellowship for Utopian Practice, the way it developed, it became a place where you could bring together artistic practice, civic engagement, social justice. And those 3 points kind of are often within the field of what's called socially engaged art, but not always. And also, we don't want to limit it to people who may identify that way. If you're interested in moving into a different part of practice, or if you're a creative person who don't necessarily call yourself an artist, but you have a creative practice and you want to bring it into a different realm, all of that is part of this, what we're interested in supporting. And so we've developed a model where they're kind of creative, analytical, logistical tools, right? So that means like we will help brainstorm on something that should come next. We can talk about what it means to work within the community you're working with, and how to do it. So that's what we mean by creative, analytical, and logistical. So it's a year long, and there are 3 slots, and we are thinking about how to shift the selection process, but there is a necessity in some ways for a selection process, because we work very closely with the fellows. So we have to be able to understand who we're working with and if it'll work out, because it's a very specific kind of opportunity. And so it's open to anybody who wants to expand the boundaries of their practice in this way, where really understanding what it means to be involved in community, to push not just the boundaries of artistic form, but of social form, and to kind of create liberatory practice through creative engagement. So the Climate Justice Fellowship is a themed fellowship. It was started about 3 years ago because of a collaboration we had with another organization called Works on Water. And there we were working specifically with water and waterways. But this year, and that was also last year, we did water and waterways, but this year we asked our previous Climate Justice Fellowship, like, well, what needs the fellows themselves, like what needs to be happening? And Cody Herman, who's our current Climate Justice Fellow, felt that it was necessary to really work on connecting to existing advocacy efforts around climate and environmental justice. Because there's so much going on. What does it mean to be an artist or a creative person, and reaching out and really seeing how to support and kind of nurture some new part of that advocacy. And so we ask that people who are interested in the Climate Justice Fellowship really reach out and think about what is climate justice, and what are things like environmental racism, and specifically like neighborhoods that are specifically frontline, for example, which is part of why the waterways was important. So like a frontline community is usually a community that's in a flood zone, and it's usually communities of color or low-income communities. And there's a very clear like injustice taking place when it comes to climate change, as with everything else. So and our current deadline is April 20th. So you've got a good head start if you're thinking about it now. And that's for, so the regular fellowship, we take all kinds of ideas. It doesn't have to be related to climate. But the one Climate Justice Fellowship slot is specific. And so we have a deadline, and then we'll have a selection committee who are like outside independent. So we have an independent selection panel. It's not people within Culture Push who do the selection necessarily, like it'll be people related, maybe former fellows, specific professionals that we have relationship with, because it's a special thing. And it has like the fellowship selection is rather different from a lot of other maybe selection panels, because what you're really judging is the quality of the idea and the sense that somebody will really benefit from being part of Culture Push, because it's not a grant. It's an involved fellowship that includes mentorship and several other kind of relationship-based work. So then we're hoping to inform everybody by early May. And then when we select fellows, we have an initial discussion just to make sure everybody understands what's going on and wants to go forward. And then we embark. So I'm going to pause here actually and just say any questions so far. Feel free to speak up or to put them in the chat. Okay. I guess not. Excellent. So we have a specific mission, and it's good to check it out, because before you put the energy into the application, you want to make sure that you really want to do this, you know, and that this is the kind of organization you want to be related to. And it helps kind of create a cohesive and coherent narrative that will make sense. So again, because it's about relationships and about kind of having a back and forth, we ask that people have 3 years of experience in their field, whatever that field may be. I mean, you could be a computer scientist who's branching out into a creative endeavor, that's fine, but that there is some sense of being a person in the world who knows how to work with others. And we don't take currently enrolled undergraduate students, but if you're in an MFA program, though, for example, if you want to be a fellow, you would not be, you would have to be out of the program by the time the fellowship comes around. So for example, if you're graduating in June 2022, great, but you can still apply. And if you have a group or a collective or collaboration, great, love that, come on in. So this is pretty important because again, it's a very specific situation. So the reason for the fellowship is so that people can develop something that hasn't been done before, and is specifically involves public interaction and community building in some way. And it can be in an unusual way, but it isn't a show specifically. Like there can be a component, for example, that's an exhibit, but really it's to develop that relationship with your public, which can be very small, but it's not like an exhibition of your work or only a theatrical performance. Those can definitely be components. But so for example, public talks, live interactive components, Skillshare, participatory performances, and again, it's a new and unrealized idea. So brand new, it doesn't have to be something you're already working on. And it should be developed during the fellowship year. It doesn't mean you have to have an end product, because what we're interested in is developing a methodology. So a lot of the things that people are doing are really new, completely new ideas with complex components. So this is the chance to develop a method with which to go forward. And should take place in the 5 boroughs of New York City. That there are several reasons for that, but that is one of the stipulations. And if you have a larger series that maybe like you have a set of performances, but you have a very specific contained experiment with public engagement, that is also a possibility. Okay, here's the question slide. Any questions?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Hi, I'm Joey. Nice to meet you. Sorry, I was driving, so that's why my camera is off. But
That's fine.
So if I'm a master's student right now and I'm not graduating until 2023, so I have 1 year left, would I be ineligible for the Climate Justice Fellowship?
It's an interesting question. It's just difficult because, you know, you would have to be doing your final year of your studies while also being a fellow, and it might be hard to concentrate on both. I mean, if you're in a specific program where you feel like you can make a good case that it would dovetail really well, I'd say go for it. You know, why not? We haven't done it yet, doesn't mean we can't do it.
Yeah, that's an interesting thought. I'll be in my thesis year, my final year.
Right.
So
Yes.
just seeing a lot of like overlaps and correlations between this fellowship and what I've been thinking about for my thesis. So that is super helpful. Thank you.
Great. Thank you for asking. I'm sure it'll be helpful to somebody else too. Any other questions? Hold on, let me look in the chat. Oh, yeah, you can have totally virtual events. Yes, that's a really good point. Again, you are keeping me on my toes. Thank you so much. So, and I feel like we should totally actually update our guidelines to say that, because of course, because of the pandemic, we've learned about the usefulness and the accessibility of online events. It really has increased how people can engage and in what way. It's absolutely, online events are absolutely accepted. I think at this point, if things are safer, we would probably want some kind of in-person engagement, but it's all debatable and it's all negotiable. Great question. Thank you. What else? These are good. Keep them coming. Okay, so if you think of something, just stop me and ask, because there's only a few of us here. So these are the application questions. They're fairly clear, straightforward. The one thing I will say is that the project narrative, we're now also accepting video or audio, and it doesn't have to just be written. It can be a video or audio narrative, spoken narrative. We're trying this out again for accessibility, and just because some people are good writers, some people are not. Doesn't mean the ideas are any less good. Yeah. And so for the project narrative, we want to know what you're thinking of doing, what your goals are, what kind of loose timeline you might have, and how it links to the fellowship, especially Climate Justice Fellowship, if you're applying for that, and the Culture Push mission. So, as I said, it can be a written narrative or spoken narrative, and written narratives are 500 words maximum, and the audio video narrative is 5 minutes. And then there are places where you can enter everything. So work samples. So work samples is an interesting question here, right? Because it's not something you've already done. So you can submit images, video and audio content. And you can do this in files or links. Now, what kinds of work samples? So we know that you're proposing a project that you haven't yet completed or maybe even started. So just whatever your strongest and most relevant work is to the idea that you're proposing. You can also include, like, if you have sketches or mock-ups that are related, those are always welcome, because that's really helpful in kind of envisioning what could be. And it can be a rough sketch. One of our favorite and really successful projects is called the Free Black Women's Library. And that was way back in 2015. So, and she sent in, yeah, right? Isn't that the best? So Ola sent in a sketch of an idea she had, and it was very rough, but the idea was so clear and the sketch was actually really helpful. We're like, oh, okay, you want to do that. And even better, she didn't even end up doing that exactly, but shifted the idea around during the fellowship year and then went off like a shooting star. So those kinds of sketches just help us understand what you're getting at. So, and then Simone Johnson, who is right here. This is actually a good example of a work sample because it's really simple, but she contextualizes it very clearly. So that's another thing. With your work samples, especially if they're not related specifically to your project, it's good to contextualize. So this is a simple, clear picture, but she tells what is happening here. And so then also, here are a few examples of narratives that could be like, these are useful, strong narratives of current fellows. So Cody Herman is the Climate Justice Fellow, and Angela Miskis is a regular fellowship fellow. So it's just being clear about what you want to do and maybe how you'll do it. You don't, I mean, we understand that things transform over time, but just to give an idea of what's going to happen. So if you want to go back and look at those, you can also just go look at our website and all of those people are on there. So then we also ask for one professional reference. So we have some idea of who you are in the world. And then, so that for that, it's important to give somebody who knows you and cares about you and will be willing to send me an email or talk to us or whatever. And will be fairly timely in their response. That's important, actually. And then we have something called an associated artist program, which is if people aren't selected for the fellowship, but it seems like they might benefit from some kind of relationship with Culture Push, then, but it, you know, and they have a really great project, but it isn't quite right, or there is some other, it's just, you know, there are only 3 slots, then we reach out to people and say, hey, you want to be an associated artist? And then when we negotiate what that relationship could be. So that's why we ask about that. And then we ask a few kind of informational questions to help us understand like where people are coming from and what's going on. How did you hear about the fellowship? So we know who we're reaching. What are your sources for funding? So we know how people get their resources, and then anything else. So here are some frequently asked questions. Do you have to complete the fellowship with the project within the fellowship year? And no, there doesn't have to be a completion, and it doesn't have to conclude. There has to be some effort at development and a clear kind of like communication with the Culture Push folks and you, so that they're like a dialogue continues. But really the point is supporting artists, as it says here, as they develop sustainable working strategies. So we don't need to see a finished product. There should be some kind of public engagement. And again, as you pointed out, that these days could be online. We had Bianca Monet did a series of this past year a series of online engagements, which were really powerful. So it's clear that like you can have a really strong and good engagement online, depends how you set it up, and that would be something we would talk about. Do you have to live in New York to apply? You don't have to live here, but everything that happens has to take place in New York City. What does that mean when it's online? Well, it should be for the benefit of New York City communities. This, I mean, it's interesting, we haven't had this come up. We've had it come up once or twice, but what I'm thinking about right now is a lot of people live in New Jersey right now because New York is insanely expensive to live in. But you work in New York, you work with communities in New York. I have a feeling that would be okay. We do have from our funders, which are mostly government, some purview to support New York City artists. But if you're collaborating with someone in New York, et cetera, I think that takes care of it. And then if you're applying to Climate Justice Fellowship, there are specific questions. So what is your intended focus? How does it relate to the theme? And then again, you can spoken narrative or written narrative. And then we have this connection to works on water. If you're someone who's working along the waterways or thinking about water justice, environmental, climate justice issues along the shoreline, that could be a relationship we establish. We have done it in the past and it's been fairly fruitful. So full disclosure, I wear another hat as part of Works on Water, and that's part of my own artistic practice. So there's a really strong link between the two organizations. And then we just ask if you want to be part of the fellowship for Utopian Practice, if you're not being a climate justice fellow specifically. Okay, we're almost done. So any more questions?
Hi again. So for the Climate Justice Fellowship, is there a prioritization for people interested in working with waterways and water, or
Not,
is it open to all interests?
not this time around.
Okay. Gotcha. Thank you.
No problem. But good question. We kind of wondered how people would feel about that one. Oh, yes, the next information session is actually going to change, but you don't need to know that because you're already here. So I'm going to stop sharing. So that's pretty much it. Can the required events be a collaborative? Absolutely. The more the merrier. So for example, do you want to say a little more about what that means for you?
Oh yes, hi. Thank you so much for this information session and for the unique opportunity that this is. I was just brainstorming in terms of the application, and originally I was going to propose only doing virtual events, but I have an interest in working with an organization called Dikes with Drills, and I think there might be New York City based and doing something like that, maybe in person. So I was just kind of like brainstorming.
Yeah, that's great. I think so. We really believe that like building networks is the strongest way to kind of realize ideas, just because, especially if you're a single person, it can get a little overwhelming. So that's why, we want to bring in people to Culture Push, but also the more community like organizations or others, not like you should bring in too many, but if you have people like that's an excellent thing, and that would be definitely like something that we would work with you on. And that's actually part of the point of being like a real nonprofit organization, is that we can also act as kind of the official carrier. So we're like, I'm working with Culture Push, and it opens doors because we look like an organization. We are an organization. And so fiscal sponsorship is part of this. And that relates to kind of to the idea of, working with organizations. Like if you have the backing of one organization, sometimes it's easier to connect to other organizations. But to answer your question, yes, that's a great idea.
Thank you so much. Just a follow-up question on fiscal sponsorship. Does it end with the conclusion of the fellowship?
Interesting question. So far, we have been offering fiscal sponsorship that continues for non-active fellows. It just like we changed the percentage administrative fee. So it's actually, and that does seem to be really, really helpful for people. I think we might have to institute a time limit at this point, because, now the fellowship is 10 years old and we're starting to accumulate a bunch of people. But so far it hasn't been a problem. And yeah, so that's an interesting and good question. Thank you. Anybody else? Anything else? Okay, well, thank you for being here. If you do have, hold on, let me put it in the chat. If you do end up having further questions, you can reach us at this email address. And why not? I'll just put here, even though I'm sure you know it. That's the website. And so cp@culturepush.org. And just reach out, feel free to ask. And please, if you know people who might be interested, please let them know, because we want people to know about it. This is a resource. So if you know people that need resources, we're interested in people who really need the resources. So pass it around, share the love. Okay, if there are no more questions, it's great to meet you all, and I hope to see your ideas in the mail. Okay, hi Lee, by the way, I think I know you through Sal. So nice to see you here. Yeah, you brought me something to my apartment.
Good to see you.
Okay, good luck, take care, and stay in touch.